Well, joining me now, CNN political commentators, Democratic strategist Dave Jacobson and Republican consultant John Thomas. Now we have the president saying if the Democrats don't support tougher laws on immigration, then so be it. Shut the government down. Listen to this.
If we don't change it, let's have a shutdown. We'll do a shutdown, and it's worth it for our country. I'd love to see a shutdown if we don't get this stuff taken care of.
John, that seems like an odd threat for the president to make, given that immigration is not part of, the budget deal which is currently being hammered out between Republicans and Democrats. The whole immigration thing's been pushed to one side. So why does he want to shut down over Explain it, please.
Well, DACA is nearing to expire.
March 5, but it's not part of the budget negotiations.
Correct, but I think for him, he's just stating his big, overwhelming priority that he wants to see funding for a wall, he wants to see increased border security funding, and that's his top priority. I don't think we're going to get to a shutdown. He knows it's bad for him, just like we saw in the last go-around. He did everything he could to avert a shutdown. But I think he's laying out his policy proposal, his policy focus to the Congress, saying, you got to give me something and tell me when you're going to give it to me, or I'll shut this whole place down.
You don't think he got a little confused and made it?
It's possible.
Okay. Dave, there has been some progress between Democrats and Republicans towards this long-term budget deal. Despite what the president says has been, no help from the Democrats, here's Republican lawmaker Barbara Comstock and the president at the end of her, what she has to say.
We don't need a government shutdown on this. We really do. I think both sides have learned that a government shutdown was bad. It wasn't good for them. And we do have bipartisan support on these things. I think we need to talk about these cases that are going on.
We're not getting support from the Democrats on this legislation.
Okay, so the Republicans say there's bipartisan support from the Democrats. The president, who's not part of the negotiation, says there's not. But regardless, if these talks collapse, did the president just embrace the next shutdown, even though John thinks it won't happen? Did he just step on a rake?
It's possible. I mean, I'm just glad that there's level-headed Republicans out there who understand fundamentally that we need bipartisanship in Washington because it's broken at this point. But I think largely, like, my issue is yesterday Donald Trump was criticizing Democrats, asking for loyalty and saying that it was treasonous that they didn't applaud him when he gave his State of the Union. And then flip it to 24 hours later and he says he'd love a government shutdown. That's treasonous. Well, shutting down the government. I mean, it's incredibly
well, it's a little bit
hypocritical.
More treasonous than not clapping, but it's still not treason.
It's pretty bad. The guy is sick in the head.
Well, the challenge is, for the president, it's hypocritical in the sense of a couple weeks ago, the president was accusing Democrats of holding tight on their policy proposal, that the Schumer shutdown, Schumer's willing to shut down the government for his policy proposal, and now Trump's doing the same thing. That is a challenge.
Yeah, a week ago he was saying let's embrace unity and come together and try and work all of this out, and on Tuesday it's like, yeah, shut it all down. Okay, we mentioned that immigration is now separate to the budget. The president has proposed a path to citizenship for 1.8 million so-called dreamers. They're the people who brought to the United States as children. They're brought here by their parents. They had no choice in the matter. They've grown up here. This is what the White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, had to say.
There are 690,000 official DACA registrants, and the president sent over what amounts to be 2.5 times that number to 1.8 million. The difference between 690 and 1.8 million were the people that some would say were too afraid to sign up, others would say were too lazy to get off their asses, but they didn't sign up.
Too lazy, too terrified. That's maybe one way of looking at it. But Dave, when John Kelly was appointed Chief of Staff, many hoped that Kelly's character would rub off on the president. Is it possible that the president's character has rubbed off on John Kelly?
I think you're hinting at something that's very possible. I think perhaps he's been brainwashed by the president because John Kelly's statement today underscores the fact that the White House has become a cesspool for racism and bigotry, and all the staffers are increasingly starting to sound more and more like Donald Trump. John's a Republican, but he doesn't talk about Latinos in a racist way like Donald Trump does or like John Kelly did today. And I think there's a big disconnect between Republicans, perhaps on Capitol Hill or out in states like California, and the Republicans that are hovering around the White House.
Yeah, and this is the point because, John, when you look at the facts, the DACA kids, the dreamers, they have a very high success rate in starting businesses. They go to college, they work hard. I mean, they're not lazy.
Well, not all of them. I'm sure.
Compared to the average, they have a higher average college entrance and studying businesses. And
I think the DACA recipients have a higher. I think Dreamers might be slightly lower,
Right.
but. Was that inartful of General Kelly to say that? Absolutely. I mean, he shouldn't be the spokesman for the administration. But were some people afraid to sign up? Probably. Did some people not know to sign up? Probably. Were some people lazy? Maybe. Should he have said it? No. It's not. I don't see what he has to gain from that. What he has to gain is saying President Trump was very magnanimous in going beyond the DACA and trying to give a pathway to citizenship for all dreamers. That's what he should have left it at.
Okay, so here is how the White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders responded when asked about Kelly's remarks.
We're focused on actually getting a solution. And frankly, I think if anybody's lazy, it's probably Democrats who aren't showing up to work and aren't actually getting to the table to make a deal on this.
And Dave, this sort of goes to your point about, this sort of, not necessarily belligerent, but, really coarse, tough language from almost everybody at this White House.
And that's why there's the disconnect when it comes to the budget negotiations and the CR, right? Like, it's clear that Donald Trump is not part of the negotiations and the process of what's going on in the Senate or the House, because he clearly thought that there was some immigration hook to that,
Right.
and there wasn't. And so these guys are like being left out, and so is Sarah.
Okay, the president now has the Democrat memo on the FBI. This is the rebuttal to the Republican one, which claims FBI corruption in the Russia investigation. Donald Trump has 5 days now to decide whether or not he'll declassify it, paving the way for its release. This is what the Republican House Speaker Paul Ryan said today.
I think what you see here is Republicans are for letting all of this information out there, provided that we scrub for sources and methods. The Republican memo was written to make sure that sources and methods were not compromised so that full disclosure could occur. We do not now know whether that's the case with the Democrat memo. It has to go through that scrubbing process.
And that's just not true, because here's the recent reporting from a lot of news agencies, including the New York Times. This is theirs. The Justice Department has warned repeatedly that the memo, the Republican memo, prepared by Republican staff members on the House Intelligence Committee, is misleading, and that its release would set a bad precedent for making government secrets public, including sensitive sources of information and methods of intelligence gathering. John, so we know that what Paul Ryan says there is not exactly accurate, but we now have a situation where the president just released a Republican memo said he'd release it without even having read it, and he may not give that same sort of standard to the Democrats.
Well, I think the memo does get released. I've also heard conflicting information. People who have read the memo, I've heard on the Republican side, have said Adam Schiff purposely put in sources to make it more difficult for the president to release the memo. So we want to make sure it's scrubbed. The big hullabaloo we had, last week or the week before, was that people were going to die when the Republicans released the memo, that there were sources in the memo. I read the memo. No one's died, and I didn't see any sources revealed in that memo. So it just... You got to obviously be careful, but the memo needs to be released. I think Trump will do it, but you have to be proper in how you do things.
The way it was explained to me as being a problem is that someone gave me this example who works for one of the intelligence agencies. It's like, if you know that Aunt Sarah always stands up at 6 o'clock at night and toasts the Queen, and you're the only person who knows that, and that bit of information which seems completely and totally irrelevant is included somewhere, then they know that you're the only person who knows that, then you're the person who gave it to them. And that's how these sort of sources are exposed. It may not be obvious to us, but it's obvious to people out there. That's all.
Well, then you should never declassify anything. The JFK documents, I mean, the argument is...
Well, they were declassified 30 years later, or, there's a time period which passes, rather.
But bottom line is the memo should be released.
Yeah.
And if you look at it from a time period, we're not, from the time that Schiff wrote the counter memo, we're not that far off from the time that the Republican, I think it was Trey Gowdy wrote the Republican memo. It took about 3 weeks to get that out. So we're about the same timeline.
Yeah, there was this interesting exchange between, again, Chief of Staff John Kelly and a pool reporter on Tuesday about the memo. Here we go. Has the president read the Democratic memo? Kelly, he has it. It's pretty lengthy. Has he read the whole thing? Kelly, no, I just gave it to him. He'll read it after this question. Kelly, oh, of course, yeah. We'll get some people down to debrief him. Dave, the Democrat memo is 10 pages long. I mean, admittedly, the Republican was 3.5. This isn't War and Peace we're talking about here. I mean...
And John Kelly's like supposed to be the adult at the adult daycare center. I mean, he's supposed to like make sure the president does his job and his due diligence. I'm not surprised it's 10 pages long. Congressman Adam Schiff is a former federal prosecutor, so he's a very substantive person, so I'm sure he dotted every I and crossed every T, which is a good thing because the Republican memo, as the Justice Department said, was extremely reckless and it was misleading, obviously, so I'm glad he's doing his due diligence. Here's the issue, John. If Donald Trump retracts a lot of this information or doesn't release it publicly, that poll that just came out by Quinnipiac today that said 53% of Americans believe that Donald Trump is obstructing the Russia investigation is just going to tick up.
Okay, finally, in the midst of all the turmoil the world is facing, Russia investigations, the threat of nuclear annihilation, constitutional crises or crises, the president wants a great big military parade, just like the one he saw in France.
It was one of the greatest parades I've ever seen. It was 2 hours on the button, and it was military might, and I think a tremendous thing for France. But we're going to have to try and top it.
Yeah, so the request has gone into the Pentagon, John. The White House says this is all about showing appreciation for the troops. This is all about Donald Trump.
I can see the argument for appreciation for the troops, but I think even more than that is you look at a lot of other countries, they have these military parades as a show of force.
Russia, North Korea.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, these are
dictatorships. But it's not.
China.
It's not to. I don't believe they do it to show that they're dictators. They show that their country's strong, and strong as a military force.
They do it as a threat.
Can I just say, I actually think this is a response to Donald Trump's tweet on North Korea with "my button is bigger." I think it's "my military is bigger."
Oh my gosh. Well, it is.
I hope not.
Well, we know that the president has long wanted a big display of patriotism and
he
U.S.
said
military
this many
might.
times. Yeah.
You know, he's wanted this for a while. So far, it really has only been sort of what he got. This moment on the campaign. Take a look.
Enemies of freedom, face the music. Come on, boys, take them down. President Donald Trump knows how to make America great. Deal from strength or get crushed every time.
The Freedom Kids. And, you know, Dave, their dad had to sue Trump to cover their expenses. I mean, that's as good as it's gotten so far.
I feel sorry for those children.
Those girls have guns. What are you talking about? That's a real show of force.
They should lead the parade. I'd put them out in front, out in front of a missile, big truck or something. Okay, guys. Dave and John, good to see you.
Thanks.